Back to the early Greek pantheon, and the religious rites seem to revolve around sacrifice largely, sacrifice of horses and other animals, and using soma, this mysterious plant which might have been some sort of drug.
Most of the religious ceremonies were conducted by women. For any important decision, women had to be consulted. This is possibly the period when the cow was considered a sacred symbol, because milk and its byproducts were the most important diets in their daily life.
At around the time of about 500 BC and thereabouts, the Upanishads were written, and at this time we see a revival of civilization and urbanism in the Ganges Valley, and an increasingly sophisticated society. And it's clear from the Upanishads that there's an increasing concern with individual salvation, with more mythical and mystical problems, and with the difference between right and wrong. So entering into something that we might regard as closer to what we would call religion today, something with moral aspects.
One of the central messages of Hinduism is that life revolves in an endless cycle. According to the principle of samsara, death is followed by rebirth. But the nature of this rebirth is determined by the deeds of the individual. The path a person chooses in life directly affects the form in which they are reincarnated. A person who lives dutifully in accordance with the principle of karma can look forward to reincarnation in a human form. If, however, someone contradicts the principle, they can expect a far more lowly reincarnation. By around 500 BC, the basic principles of Hinduism were firmly established. These included the formal division of society into classes or castes. The lowest of these were the Sudra, the labourers. Then came the Vaishya, the peasants and merchants. Further up the caste ladder were the Kshatriya, the rulers and warriors. At the top of the social pyramid were the Brahmins, the teachers and priests. By the middle of the first millennium BC, this highest of castes also included ruling kings, known as Rajas.
The Brahmins had taken over the religious ceremonies which were being held in every household, which previously were conducted by women. They were making it more and more rigid to suit their means. And because of this rigidity, people were buckling under pressure, especially the lower castes, because they were looked down upon by the Brahmins. And this is the time when untouchables came into form. New schools of thought started emerging. And this is a period when Jainism and Buddhism came into form to break away from the rigidity of Hinduism.
India was now emerging as a recognizable nation of 16 autonomous states. In the 4th century, one of these, which Chandragupta would found as the Mauryan Empire, emerged as the dominant force. By 325 BC, the new king Chandragupta Maurya became the ruler of the state of Magadha. He soon proved himself an outstanding warrior. By 300 BC, he had conquered the valleys of the Indus and the Ganges and taken over the empire of Alexander the Great. The son and grandson of Chandragupta also proved to be great military leaders. By 262 BC, the Mauryan king Ashoka controlled almost the whole Indian peninsula. This was a large empire, and the Mauryans needed to maintain a tight control within its boundaries. A Greek observer described how an enormous army of 700,000 men policed the empire, and the Mauryan leaders were not afraid to use this army. However, the Mauryan age is better remembered for its wealth and culture. The sumptuous life of the imperial court was later recalled in some of the finest images of Indian art. The skills of the jeweller and the goldsmith were very much in demand. The age-old Indian love of exotic fabrics can also be seen.
The Mauryan Empire is crucial, and it's a fundamental period in Indian history. It's the first civilized period for which we have historical evidence, we have writing. And it's also because of Ashoka, one of the third ruler of the Mauryan Empire, and the edicts, stone edicts that he wrote, which survive all over India today. And we also have a Greek ambassador who was actually present at the Mauryan court at Pataliputra, which was the capital, modern Patna in Bihar. Archaeological evidence has borne out some of the descriptions he gives us. It's quite likely that Pataliputra was the largest city in the world at that time.
The fact that Buddhism was postulating a moral code which was irrespective of any class, caste or gender barriers was in effect the basis of its popularity. While there would have been Hindu orthodoxy, this would have been, of course, restricted to the upper castes, whereas the common populace would have probably en masse converted to Buddhism, in that this was a religion that gave them a major cultural underpinning. Until, of course, Buddhism becomes a state religion under Emperor Ashoka. Ashoka Maurya actually converts to Buddhism after most horrific battles on the plains of Kalinga, where he's deeply moved by human suffering at large. With the conversion of Buddhism as a state religion, it obviously traversed the barriers of certainly notions of the priestly class and the common populace, and therefore it had a much, much greater appeal, as indeed we see in all the Buddhist monuments that survive down to the present day are in fact initial edifices that were re-erected to some extent by Emperor Ashoka.
The Buddha himself took many of the ideas already formed by Hindu thought, Vedic thought, most important of which would be reincarnation and karma, responsibility for one's actions. So they have a very similar root. The most important of the Four Noble Truths. Life is suffering. He saw suffering around him. The second noble truth is that all suffering comes from ignorance and from desire. The third noble truth is that there is a way out of that, which is nirvana, salvation, if you like, from this eternal cycle of suffering. And that the road to nirvana is the eightfold way, a path which he specified of right behavior, right thought, right meditation, right speech, right actions. So those beliefs, the Four Noble Truths and the beliefs that are associated with them, are distinct to Buddhism.
The embracing of Buddhist principles by King Ashoka led to a 30-year period of wise rule throughout his empire. Physical reminders of this remain today. Across the subcontinent, he ordered inscriptions to be carved in stone. Known as Ashoka's edicts, these were intended to be a permanent record of the emperor's enlightened thoughts and beliefs. From the 2nd century BC onwards, Buddhists had begun to carve artificial caves out of a steep hill near the city of Ajanta. The overall result was some 29 caves, of which the 19th may be the finest. Here, surrounded by the living rock, is a stupa mound. These were originally simple structures intended to house the holy relics of the Buddha. Inside, a huge figure of the Buddha, dramatically illuminated by the natural light entering through the gabled cave opening. It is easy to imagine the reaction of 19th century Europeans when they first discovered caves like this. There are few man-made creations as spiritually moving as this labor of faith. Sculpture is not the only art form visible at Ajanta. From 200 AD until 650 AD, the cave walls were covered with mural paintings. Fresco work widely believed to be the greatest achievement of Indian visual art.
These are extremely important works for a host of reasons. They are the earliest surviving murals or examples of painting in the Indian tradition, and in themselves are therefore extremely important and valuable as archaeological evidence. What is extremely important about these in terms of their message is that they in fact illustrate the various former lives of the Buddha before he actually became the Buddha, which is to say, all the pre-Buddha states before he was actually enlightened and became the enlightened Buddha. He was born as a prince, and all his pre-Buddha states are essentially shown as somewhat royal depictions. The depiction of a prince adorned with all the state regalia, all the jewelry. You tend to see his elongated earlobes, which obviously held heavy royal earrings. The whole corpus